This segment is brought to you in part by the Canadian Historical Arms Society, owners of the Genesee Range, the premier recreational sport and training facility in Western Canada. See us online at historical-arms.com.
The Quiet Professional, a podcast about law enforcement, security, justice, and politics. We are digging deeper on the issues and going where the information takes us with access to experts and authorities. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Quiet Professional. Today we're going to be talking about some homegrown extremism with a focus on chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. That thing never gets easier to say. CBRN concerns. For that, I have Dr. Jeff Brodeur here. He has experience developing CBRN strategy, plans, and training programs at all echelons of the U.S. Department of Defense from a strategic, operational, and tactical perspective. Dr. Brodeur was formerly trained at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College and the U.S. Army War College. His last military duty assignment was as the Assistant Commandant for the U.S. Army CBRN Schoolhouse and Regimental Headquarters, where he oversaw training of an annual student load of approximately 8,000. That's a big number. Dr. Brodeur has a doctoral degree from Colorado Technical University and is an internationally recognized CBRN expert. He's a keynote speaker and panel member with experience in the USA, Canada, Iraq, Brazil, and Sweden. And now he is the vertical market manager for safety and security at Rigaku Analytical Devices. So welcome, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time and the invitation.
As we were just chatting before starting this up, I just interviewed Mike Brown, so a colleague of yours. I guess Rigaku is bringing some pretty good people on board. They got the two of you so far, so we'll have to keep kind of going through the roster.
Yeah, so I think the difference with Rigaku Analytical Devices and most other private industry firms is we not only have the engineers and the scientists to break through technology and bring cutting edge technology, but we also have people with operational experience.
Yes.
So sometimes, if you've got a widget, it does cool things at an expo or a conference. But sometimes it's difficult for the operator to understand exactly how to employ it. Employing the device can be the most challenging piece to understand how to more effectively do your job.
Yeah.
And in a nutshell, our devices bring information to the point of need so that it informs your tactical decisions. In other words, 15 years ago, we required a field lab full of expensive laboratory equipment, a number of PhDs to run the equipment, to give you something called presumptive ID, because the only capability operators had was detection. Now we can bring presumptive ID to the operator without the field lab and without all of that investment, and our report comes back in less than 1 minute.
Oh, wow.
Not 5 minutes, not 20 hours, right? And one of the challenging things about a field lab is they quickly become overwhelmed and backlogged. And so your response is delayed.
Okay.
Our technology is about 3.7 pounds. I can teach a high school graduate how to operate it in about 4 hours. And if that high school graduate's about 20 something and I give them another 2 hours, they'll probably be able to figure out how to operate it better than I do.
Yeah.
And so that's the key to this technology in general, and why it is critical in my mind for operators to, number one, understand how to use it, how to employ it, and number two, have it at the ready.
Hey, I couldn't agree more. I sometimes I say that's the difference between the policy makers and then you got the doers. And they can set policy or change things, but once you actually implement it, looks very different once you kind of hit the ground and get out on the street with it. So
Yeah, the application of theory has a number of obstacles, doesn't it?
yeah,
And then
yeah.
you've got to figure it out.
So once we're going to get into a lot of that, but I do want to start just talking a bit about you, and I want to find out how you even got into this as a career, as a profession. So I'm wondering, like, were you just a mad scientist as a kid, and this kind of flowed naturally, or once you got into a certain career field, you just keep walking through open doors, and you find yourself in this world. So what was it that kind of got you into this?
Yeah, right after the earth cooled and I went to college in about 1980, we didn't have the internet. And so you didn't have access to information in terms of all the options. So I went to university, and my passion was the science and technology. It was math, and it was chemistry and biology. I can't tell you why I was passionate about it, but it was a lot more fun to do than mathematics or history. In fact, I went to a Catholic university in San Antonio, and I was required to take a history class. I got a solid C in that class. And I went to my advisor frustrated, and I said, "Are there any in lieu ofs? Can I take another? Because you've got me down for another two history courses, and this is just not." I read a chapter, and while I'm reading that chapter, my mind just kind of wanders into kind of dog thoughts. Oh, what was that smell? What was that noise? And it's distracted. And after reading the chapter, I couldn't tell you what it was about. And he said, "Sure, you can take." I think sarcastically, "You can take more biology and chemistry classes." And I said, and it set off a bell. I'm like, "Seriously, I can? I can?" He's like, "Why would you?" And you don't understand. I mean, you gave me the green light. So I graduated with a biology degree, and I think I'm like 3 semesters short of a double major chemistry. So I took chemistry and biology and math in lieu of history and arts and all of the other things that make you a rounded individual. I just kind of did tunnel vision and went into that. The challenge, though, I was an athlete in high school on my own individual sports, not necessarily high school team sports, and so um, I graduated in 1984 and applied for jobs, and quickly became frustrated with all of the no's. I had the impression that once I had a college degree, I just had to select what job I kind of wanted. I thought that's how the world worked, and it
Yeah,
didn't. Somebody
yeah.
had the option to say no. And then I quickly realized that with a bachelor's degree, working in a lab, chemistry or biology, you're just sort of kind of the nursemaid. You've got a PhD directing the traffic and the plan. And likely all I was going to do was wash dishes and mix reagents and that sort of thing. And became disgruntled, and looked for opportunities. And I was a red-blooded American college graduate, 21 years old, and when I was not fully engaged, I found ways to entertain myself, and likely found myself in hot water most of the time. And after about 9 months of looking for a job that I thought that I would enjoy, I couldn't find any. My dad had retired from the Air Force,
Okay.
flew about 100 and something combat missions in Vietnam. And so I went to the recruiter, and I came home, and I told my dad, "I went to the recruiter. I'm thinking about this. What do you think?" He said, "You go to the Air Force?" And I said, "No." He said, "Why?" And I said, "I've been around the Air Force my entire life. And you guys are, I mean, you walk around with your hands in your pockets, and that's not who I am." I mean, that was, and he understood it because I was a different personality. He said, "What are you thinking?" And I said, "The Marines or the Army. This seemed like it's a whole lot of fun." Um, Fast forward, I joined the Army because the university did not have an ROTC program. I went through officer candidate school, and they gave us a wish list one day. What branch would you like to be branched in the Army? I didn't know a lot about many of the branches, but I found this one title that I understood. It was the chemical branch, later to rename itself the CBRN branch. And I knew chemistry. And so I put that down as my number one selection. Luckily for me, um, probably 19 out of 20 people joining the Army don't want to do the job of the chemical branch. They detest
That
it.
was what I was going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, my son graduated from West Point and wanted nothing to do with the chemical branch. He's a Black Hawk company commander right now. So proud of him.
Mhm.
And so I joined the Army. I was branch chemical, still kind of an athlete at heart, and ended up going to airborne, air assault, and ranger school. And I loved getting dirty. I loved going out and doing the soldier kind of thing. Um, and then one day I found myself as the assistant commandant to the CBRN school and regiment, and 29 years had gone by, and it was time for me to retire. I mean, it went by that quick. Um, I'll never forget. I was sitting in my home in Hawaii when Operation Just Cause went down. It was the invasion of Panama.
Mhm.
And I was so frustrated that I was not part of that, that I signed off of vacation. We call it leave in the military. I signed off of leave and I sat there watching CNN,
Oh,
just hoping, somebody would call out, Jeff, we need you here. Of course,
yeah.
there wasn't a CBRN threat in Panama. And then when it came time for me to go to Desert Storm, I'm telling you, I felt like a professional football player who had trained and worked out hard for about, I think it was probably 5, 6 years then. And I finally was available to get into the stadium and play ball. It was
Okay.
finally my time. We finally had combat coming our way. And there was a true chemical threat. Hell, there was a chem, bio, rad, and nuke threat in Desert Storm, not just from the Iraqis either. Um, and so, I came out of Desert Storm, 20 something. I had just done my job, happy as heck about it. I was bulletproof, if you ask me. There
Mhm.
wasn't anything that I couldn't do. And then, just kind of bloomed in the Army, if you will.
Okay. You're talking about like even Desert Storm and just the amount of threats that existed there. I guess like as a topic, CBRN, I would say the average person day to day doesn't think about this. And you were kind of mentioning this a bit earlier when we were talking before we recorded. But can you give like a true perspective? Is it even possible to kind of gauge how big of a threat this is, like on the day to day to people? Like people still talk about concerns about nukes or nuclear war. Are people that willing to fire off nukes? Is that a real possibility, or use chemical warfare? Like I just wonder, like, who's thinking about this stuff? Obviously we got you, but how many people need to be on top of this at all times? Who's taking care of that situation?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I would tell you the entire there's an inventory of chemical warfare agents, and they all have a military task and purpose, generating from World War One. And so the
Mm.
first question sometimes we ask is, why are there so many chemical warfare agents? And I can give you a couple of scenarios of why they're useful in combat. We've decided as a international community that that's inhumane. We've decided not to go there, but it was the practice of military operations and combat that brought us to the level where we had perfected the art of generating so many different types. And the purpose of a chemical warfare agent is to create a momentary tactical advantage.
Okay.
In other words, if I have two forces combating one another, and I use chemical warfare agent on the opposing force, at some point in time, they have to stop and put their mask on and their gloves and their overgarment equipment. Um, their communications becomes hindered because you don't communicate well
Yeah.
when you've got a mask on, a hood, right? Your aim fire it becomes distorted. You don't do that as well. You don't maneuver as quickly and as efficiently as you would without all of that. And there's a psychological piece to it,
Yeah.
right? There's this invisible threat that if I take my mask off, I'm going to die. Most chemical warfare agents were never designed to kill. They were designed to incapacitate.
Oh, okay.
They can kill. There is a lethal dose of 50% of the population, but they were never really designed. There are a few exceptions to that. VX is a lethal nerve agent, courtesy of the UK and the US. Novichok, the family of nerve agents that the Russian scientists designed, is extremely lethal. But getting back to my point, so there's this moment in time where I have the tactical advantage because you're busy worrying about yourself and self preservation. You can't aim your weapon very well. And if I'm not wearing protective equipment, that gives me the tactical advantage. And if I'm planned it out properly, my opposing force becomes a very soft target, and it's very easy to neutralize them. And then I go on to the next objective, right?
Yeah.
I would tell you in 1985, when I entered the Army, chemical warfare agents, well, chem, bio, rad, nuke, CBRN in general, was generally a state sponsored weapon because it took skill and equipment that the individual couldn't afford. Fast forward to 2025, it's much easier and much cheaper because of technology
Okay.
to generate small volumes of chemical, biological, radiological, not necessarily nuclear. Nuclear is still kind of a technical obstacle for most individuals. Um, but I don't need metric tons in order to make my point as a non state actor. I just need enough to prove to a government that I have the capability.
Yeah.
And then using it effectively coerts a government to back down on a policy decision, discredit the government because governments are generally required to provide safety and security to the citizenry. So, if I can prove that your government can't keep you safe or secure, then you'll challenge the legitimacy of your own government. So it's much more proliferated now than it ever was before. It's much easier. It's much cheaper. And in terms of threat, we normally identify the capability and the intent of
Okay.
a nefarious actor. Okay. So if you have the capability, but not the intent to do harm, you're really not a threat.
Hmm.
If you have both, then I need to keep my eye on you and monitor. And because at some point in time, you're going to employ that capability with an intended threat. And that's where we're at right now, especially in the United States. We have so many nefarious actors that have entered our borders, and I'm sure Canada as well.
Yeah.
You can talk about the entire European Union.
Hmm.
I think has a migration problem. Immigration is not an issue, but there needs to be screening and vetting involved to understand. And the example I would give you is we have documented cases where Iranian operatives went through Venezuela. Venezuela doesn't really have a credible State Department, so they were granted Venezuelan passports and came in as Venezuelans under that passport regime.
Okay.
But they were Iranian operatives, right? So now I have somebody with the intent to do harm and the capability. I don't necessarily need to bring a weapon into the border. Everything that I need um, is available to produce small volumes and do the damage, either physical or psychological, that I need to on a population.
Speaking on that, do you find that there's certain groups and however they might kind of congregate, whether it's through religion or race or country of origin, or, whatever it might be, that would tend to use that something like chemical or biological kind of weapons against somebody? Is that like they might tend more toward that? Because I mean, I can't see like organized crime in Canada or the United States utilizing that necessarily, but you bring people over from, like you're saying, the Iranians, and maybe they might have more experience with it, or it's something that they've been exposed to in teachings that might be a group that you have to focus more on because they are more willing, they are more capable, they have that intent. Because there's certain populations that you have to go, okay, if we're going to have a starting point at looking at something like this, we're going to find it in this area.
There you go, thinking like a Westerner.
Yeah.
So let me just highlight a couple of cases. Ongoing in the Ukraine-Russian war, there are, I think, about 5,000 pieces of ordnance that went to laboratory. OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and the governments of Netherlands and Germany all confirmed that a World War I era choking agent and riot control agents, all in violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention, have been used in the Ukraine area of operations almost beginning at like month 3 or 4, and they continue.
Oh, wow.
In 2023, the United Nations published a report that um, back in, I think, 2014 to 2017 was the window of their activity in northern and western Iraq, produced 8 chemical weapons, and employed them and tested them on human beings.
Wow.
So no, and this is kind of where the drug world and the CBRN world sort of overlap. Transnational criminal organizations, they're number one. They're a profit and loss organization. They're all about making money. And the easiest way to do that is with things that are in the black market or that are illegal. No, you just need a phone call from somebody from an adversary's country to call them up and say, I'll wire you money if you do this, and this is how you do it. No, there are people who will play if you pay to do this. So it's not just the 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 lone actor, the lone wolf, if you will. It's not necessarily an extremist perspective. I would describe chemical and biological and radiological as weapons of opportunity. All right, so they've been employed many times ineffectively recently, and I say recently in the last 10 years. But that doesn't matter because you achieved your objective, right? You created uncertainty in the population. I've operated side by side with some of the most lethal U.S. warriors in the Army. And as soon as you tell them there's a chemical threat, they all sort of go instinctively into this, hey, Jeff, is my mask okay? What do I need to do? Right. And then I become the director, the orchestra director at that time. It has a huge psychological impact, is my point.
Yeah. So what I'm kind of hearing from that is everybody is eligible to be a part of this. Kind of like you're saying, if you pay, you play, and so it could be anybody at any time. It's just what level are they involved? What is their exact function in there? Those type of things.
Yeah, let me give you a scenario. In the United States, I think my statistics are correct. They're about, I think I looked this up maybe 18 months ago. If you take a look at the number of PhD candidates in the United States in chemistry and the life sciences, so the biology, pathogens, viruses, bacteria, that sort of thing, only about 50% graduate.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's not because they're not smart. They're incredibly intelligent individuals. But they go through this thing called research, and they do their research over the course of about 3 to 5 years. And many times you're taught in the PhD program that when you finish it, you are the world's expert at that very, very slim lane of knowledge, that thing that you've studied for 3 to 5 years. Nobody knows that thing better than you. And so some of these students get to the point where they push up against their research advisor because now they are convinced they are the smartest in that lane on that subject. They push back at the process of completing your PhD and your dissertation. Um, and they end up either getting kicked out or they drop out. They've completed all their courses. Now I've got an intelligent, disgruntled person on my hands. What are
Yeah.
we going to do with that skill set?
Mhm.
Right. And they're easy to recruit because they all go to the same conferences with business cards looking for jobs. Because all the companies that are undergoing their research are there. And so, they're all pooled at the same conferences. They're all very inexpensive because they don't have their PhD, but they've got the experience under their belt, and they have a grudge against society or somebody.
Yeah.
So they make the perfect person to recruit.
And you know what? That is something that has come up more in discussions I've had around finance or technical knowledge, or like your hacker types, where you get cartels or states come in and they recruit people from some of the best U.S. schools. They want the best, and it's like, well, I'm going to offer you this ton of money. You just got to find a little motive, and then you've got this person flipped onto your side. So it can kind of work the same in this world as well, as is what you're saying.
Yeah, my point is that the threat is continuous, and we always have to sort of have our radar on,
Yeah.
right?
I'm thinking like just from a law enforcement perspective, the amount of training I've received, maybe I took like one course at some point and it was more of like a checkbox exercise. And it's like, what do you do if a truck carrying something that has like this sign on it crashes? It's like, well, I'm just going to wait till the fire department shows up. I'm not walking into a cloud of gas if I can even see it or smell it. And it hasn't killed me at that point. Like it literally is, it's a massive gap, a lack of knowledge of all these types of things out there. If something like this was to take place as an attack within a major city, how prepared would law enforcement be? How prepared would government be to respond? Who would be the first people to really, like, I mean, law enforcement and fire are going to be the first on scene. I don't think they're prepared for that type of scenario. So would it be waiting around for the military to show up once something's identified?
And that's a good question. There's an old adage about the canary in the coal mine. Coal miners used to put canaries in coal mines to sort of measure the amount of oxygen in the coal mine, and if you had any sort of poisons kind of floating around in the atmosphere. And as soon as that canary dropped to the bottom of the cage, that was their signal to exit. And so law enforcement are generally the first on the scene. They're generally, there are pockets of excellence, but they're generally not trained to a degree of proficiency to encounter this sort of a threat. And they generally, if they've been fielded equipment, that equipment is somewhere on the shelf,
Yes.
right? Because the most frequent thing that they use is the 6 inches between their ears on de-escalating, maybe their weapon on occasion, their handcuffs, and the vehicle that they're in. And that's why they're known as the blue canaries.
Mm,
When people show up on a hazardous scenario like this, the first things that hazmat crews or fire departments normally do is identify the blue canaries. And if law enforcement is down on the ground, they're putting their respiratory protection on before they exit the vehicle. And that's kind of sort of why our our piece of equipment is so important is because you take an unknown and make it a known. And if you know exactly what you're working with, then you can do a couple of things. You can modify your personal protective equipment to protect those that are responding. And then it allows you to develop an informed mitigation plan. Um, I would tell you we're at the point in technology right now where we should be hardwiring instruments to our patrol cars.
Okay.
You've got a constant supply of power. Law enforcement is all over the township or whatever, wherever they're at, right? And so we can constantly survey the environment to determine whether or not there's something harmful in the atmosphere or on the ground, or not.
Okay.
But we're just not. I think it's a function of, for some law enforcement, it's not my job. That kind of seeps into the logic, and then it's not a cheap uh, proposition either. If you're gonna hardwire all the patrol cars with equipment, that's a good budget that you've just obligated yourself to.
Yeah.
But to answer your other question, I think law enforcement and first responders, there are pockets of excellence in the United States. I would tell you, in the large cities that we have, they are probably more prepared than anybody else. Smaller townships, less likely. Where I live in North Carolina, because it's an expensive skill set to maintain. It's a skill set. It atrophies if you don't use it after about 90 days or so. And because the equipment is so expensive, we sort of regionalize the capability. And so that capability may be 1 to 3 hours away. So then it's more important for first responders to identify the threat so that they can, number one, separate the population from the threat. That's easy to do without a whole lot of training. Then to contain the threat, that generally means that I can put barriers up so that the liquid, the powder, the solid doesn't spread further than it already is. And then many times, if it's presenting a respiratory threat, a blue tarp over the top of it will minimize some of that as well and contain it. And then you just sit and wait for hazmat crews to show up. In the United States, we have something called the um, um, Defense Support to Civil Authorities, DISCA, and we actually have about 8,200 trained, organized, and equipped series of task force ready to deploy to assist in echelon. And what I mean by that is, in our construct, the National Guard is normally day-to-day operations dictated by the governor. So, and they're already there pretty close. They're in the big city or somewhere in the state. They can respond pretty quick.
Okay.
If the challenge is much greater than that, then we have reservists that are task organized. And then if it's just the mother of all scenarios, and you've got about a 4,000 person task force made up mostly of active duty that will descend upon it. And they've got a sustained capability with 2 packages, and so they can rotate every 90 days if they need to until the scenario is mitigated.
Wow. I don't know if we would even have that capability in Canada. it's a I would say I'm not aware of anything like that. So maybe somebody sitting in an office somewhere would be like, "Oh yeah, we have all that." Well, they definitely haven't told us at the ground level about it.
So I think in the United States, about 2011, um, we as a government decided that the problem was too large for local or state governments to manage or to resource.
Yeah.
So Department of Defense in 2011 was given the permanent mission to do that. And so we're what, 14 years down the road. Task forces they go through a series of training and then certification before they assume mission status. They have specialized equipment to deal with it. That works for the chem threat. It works for the radiological threat. The biologic is, depending on what the biologic is, um, can be challenging without additional resources, especially if it's a virus like COVID. And then the nuclear threat. The nuclear threat presents itself another number of interesting challenges, and that is if we have a scenario in the United States of a 5 kiloton nuclear weapon going off in a major city.
Oh, right.
The challenge with that is, if you've got any significant levels of radiation emitting, nobody's really going in
Yeah.
until they lower. You know what I mean? Because all you're doing is reinforcing failure. Any of those first responders that go in when the radiation levels are high, we do have a thing called turn back dose rate, but that just means once you hit that level, you have to turn away and go back.
Okay.
And so that's kind of a wait and see. Um,
Hmm.
So I don't know if that'll keep you up at night or not, but
it's a fascinating topic. I think most people just think of these things as being off in a far, far distant land, and that's their problem to worry about outside of some of the nuclear talks. But I think most people don't think about this. It doesn't come up in day to day conversations or training. That's why I find it so fascinating. We used to run scenarios up here where we'd have these multi-staged kind of massive attacks, and we would run the police through scenarios, and it'd be like multiple sites where you have a bomb going off, and then there's an active shooter in some building, and you just see within minutes how thin your resources are stretched. Kind of going back to what you're saying about some of the chemical stuff and how it's used to create the delay. And I would think most of the stuff that we see is it creates a delay. And you're like, okay, am I going in? Am I not going in? Where what do I got to do first? It just creates a mass amount of panic. And then if you're not bringing the right equipment, well, now you got a whole other set of issues. So it's something that I don't think is considered enough. And like I said earlier, especially being on the front lines for a lot of what could happen, at least domestically, the preparation is kind of lacking there. The training is lacking there.
yeah. So I mean, we just discussed the tip of the problem. I mean,
Mhm.
the back end is how do we manage our casualties?
Yes.
Are the hospitals um, do they have the capacity to be inundated with both real casualties and then the worried well? And then we have a thing called mass casualty decontamination. It's doctrinal. It makes sense on paper. But if that capability is not shown up on the objective, who is going to tell me, an injured casualty, that I can't put you in the ambulance or bring you to the hospital because we haven't washed you down yet?
Yeah.
Nobody
Okay.
is. We're going to throw you in the back of the ambulance. We'll call that a dirty ambulance. And you'll show up at the hospital and they'll do the best that they can. And then they'll try to treat me. I mean, if the device has gone off properly, I've got both, I'm a casualty of several things. First is the chemical warfare agent, if that's what you used. And then there's probably another kinetic threat that has disabled me or injured me. So I'm normally got, half a dozen problems by the time I see the doctor at the emergency room.
Well, and it's not to fear monger, and it's not to say, oh, it's not to kind of crap on people and say we're not prepared, but it's something for serious discussion, right? And we have our issues up here in Canada where we're kind of lax on a lot of these thoughts and thought processes when it comes to crime and some of the stuff that can happen. Now it's just to get people to have a serious conversation about that and go, hey, are we prepared? It's just to open their minds to it, and let's start working on these things. Let's start working on some solutions. Um, I think that's where kind of the purpose, even of this podcast, I think that's where we kind of take it is like, people should start looking into things and start asking those questions. Are we prepared? And like you said, usually we're kind of talking about the tip of the iceberg, and then you start getting into it, and all of a sudden you go, oh wow, there's these 10 other processes I got to do, and those 10 processes lead to 20 or 30 other processes that I got to do. So it's like, okay, we got to get ahead of this. We got to start working.
Yeah, and since we're talking about it, let me just add fuel to the fire and make the problem worse for you.
Okay, giver.
I want to say within the last 3 years, we've learned the impact of AI on this threat. So there was a peer-reviewed paper that was published, I want to say in 2022 or 2023. Small pharmaceutical company out of North Carolina CEO was asked by a European conference to present their assessment of AI on the pharmaceutical industry. And if you're not familiar, pharmaceutical industries have with great success used AI.
Oh,
And the way I would describe it is, if I've got a pharmaceutical that has a list of side effects that I really am interested in, tuning down for the benefit of the patient, I put the chem structure in an AI model and I ask it, can you restructure this pharmaceutical so that it doesn't present headaches or whatever the other side effects that we don't. And it runs through and it comes up with a structure. And then pharmacy companies then, in other words, the research to figure out that new structure is done by AI anymore. All that the chemist has to do is figure out, first of all, they have to confirm that the new structure does what they think it's going to do and that it is better. And then they come up with the most efficient way to produce that pharmaceutical, and then they're off to the races.
yeah.
What has that done? It's taken 10 years and it's crunched it down to about 18 months. And it's taken my costs that are this much and drawn down here. So the CEO went to his story is that he went to his chief technology officer and said, let's run this model through our AI platform. This is a couple of years ago. So the query that they presented the AI platform, and the AI platform was run on, by their description, Mac computers that were 6 years old. So this is not the best,
Yeah.
right? This is not cutting edge. And so they presented the query, can you provide chemical structures that are at least as lethal as sarin nerve agent? They did that before they left. They returned the next morning with a nice cup of coffee to find 40,000 different variants
Wow.
of agents or chemical structures that were just as or more lethal to sarin. The problem with that in our domain is not all sensors can tell that it's a nerve agent because not all nerve agents are designed the same. They don't all have the same chemical structure. Prior to, I want to say, 1980, almost all of our nerve agents had what we call an organophosphate background. That was the common denominator. So all of your instruments look for that organophosphate background, and you'll find it today in insecticides,
Okay.
and that sort of thing. But if you produce a nerve agent without that organophosphate background, then the instrument doesn't know it's a nerve agent and it won't give you a warning. Moreover, if you produce an agent that requires 50% parts per million molecules that are in the air in order to have a lethal effect, now what you've done for your vapor systems is they have 50% less of a chance of gathering enough sample to do the analysis to give you the same alarm. So now you can walk in, and we call it a false negative, thinking that it's clear, and it's really not.
Okay.
And so how do we and these are AI generated, I would call them toxic chemicals. They're not traditional chemical warfare agents. Many of them you can argue are dual purpose, commercial legitimate use and nefarious use. So it makes it extremely challenging to litigate it,
Yep.
and control it. And so they're just kind of out there. Now, do our sensors pick all 40,000? If you really want to create a sample of something that you're certain will have the intended effect, but it will cause the government and first responders to scratch their head whether or not their equipment works, their mask work, their detectors work, then kind of the world is your oyster. You just go after one of the 40,000. And albeit they only ran that at night. So it was probably during a 10-hour period. They didn't run it for 30 days.
Yeah. If we're talking like extremism or homegrown extremism, how available is this to the average person if they wanted to get their hands on the right stuff and kind of concoct something? Whether it's like, I mean, we're seeing people bring in what was the people there? I think they came from China and they brought in some sort of thing that could infect a crop. I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Yeah. No, that was a good one. That popped up on my radar. So let me answer your questions in sequence. How easy is it to do? Gentleman named Clampert. I'll never forget this story. I think he's from Arkansas. This story's about 18 months old now. I can look it up. A felon on probation with no education in his rented mobile home was disgruntled with his neighbors and figured out how to manufacture ricin.
Jeez.
Ricin is a toxin.
Yeah.
Okay. If you've got the intent and the capability, this individual is highly motivated, against his neighbors, figured out that was the best weapon, and he did it. Right. So I don't need a PhD to do it. The motivation and drive. And there are a number of avenues for information to gather, to point you kind of in the right direction. That's not to say that he didn't screw up, the first 100 times, but he finally got it right. And that's the other thing that is challenging with this description. Let me give you a quick scenario. If I detonate a mortar round in the forest and there's nobody there, and I come back 90 days, are there any signs that a mortar round was detonated in the forest? Generally, the answer is yes. Trees are fallen, there's some sort of a crater. I can go in, I can do some forensics and tell you what the explosive material was, what the size approximate of the device is. But if I go into that same forest and I release a chemical warfare agent or a biological warfare agent and nobody sees it, nobody is affected by it, there aren't any instruments that register it, and I go back 90 days later, do I know that somebody did that? No.
Hmm.
It's a huge blind spot. And my point to that is, Am Sharikyo is a celebrated cult leader, known in 1995 as releasing sarin nerve agent in a Tokyo subway. But that wasn't. It took 2 years for law enforcement to finish up their case investigation. He had tried over 30 times. He had failed 30 something times.
Yeah.
With biological, radiological, and chemical. And then one day he got it right. My point is, we approach this as a low frequency, high consequence event, and we don't have the numbers to justify that logic because we don't know how frequent it fails.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If we actually knew how many times it failed and how many times it was successful, then we could compare that with other acts of terror or other acts of criminal activity. Okay, I sort of got on a side tangent there.
No, you're good.
Yeah, no, we talked about the ease of it, and then the second question was, I forgot.
No, you pretty much answered it there. So it was just talking about like, how easy is it for people to obtain this stuff, and then obviously if they have the intent now, looking at implementing something like that, like outside of intelligence ahead of time. I guess there's no real way to prevent this. We have a lot of the chemicals and things are available. They have dual use purpose. So it's hard to litigate. Like, you know, on the prevention side, I guess is where we'd always want to start. How easy is it to prevent something such as this? And I was bringing in the people bringing in that stuff for the crops, just as an example of like, it's coming in.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We were talking about the pathogen that came in from China. Let me tell you why that's so important. Yeah, let me tell you why that's so important.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because that pathogen is highly destructive to four types of crops that in the United States we grow. And more importantly, those crops are on the futures market in Wall Street. This is what we call a biological attack on the economy, not a biological attack on human beings. We normally associate attacking humans with a biologic is the only way to approach it. So if you agree that most farms in the United States are corporate entities and there's less mom and pop, and that they've sort of concentrated into a number of states, as soon as you have an outbreak like that, you have a moratorium on your export abilities. Countries won't accept your grain, your flour, your poultry, whatever it is that's been infected for 2 years.
Yeah.
So I can't export that anymore. I can't export it until I confirm and I show that I've exterminated the pathogen. Who bankrolls the corporations? Banks. Who bankrolls the banks? Taxpayers. And because they're on the futures market, it's a direct impact on our investments in the futures. And so it's really an impact on the economy. And that is why that pathogen was so significant. How do we prevent it? I'll just give you a U.S. citizen's point of view. The Constitution and laws that we enjoyed also hinder us.
Yeah.
And so you've got in a democracy, you have to find the right balance between what the citizens are willing to accept in the name of safety and security, and the trade-offs in freedom that they want to give up. As an example, because I've been in this business for, I don't know, I'd hate to say it's probably closing in on 36 years. The FBI already knows that if they pull up my desktop and my tablet, that there are a number of entries and queries looking for pathogens and radiological dispersal devices and exposure devices and that sort of thing. But hopefully they know that's my job. I'm on the winning side. I'm on your team. You know what I mean? But for somebody, if that is out of ordinary for their personality, their occupation, that sort of thing, it ought to raise red flags. But in many democracies, it's not legal to interdict before a crime has been committed.
Yeah.
And we trample all over existing laws, constitutions, that sort of thing. So it's really, really kind of difficult unless you have a weaponized agent ready to go and it doesn't read "to whom it may concern." It's got somebody's name on it and you know where it's going to go.
Yeah.
It's extremely challenging. So how do you deter? I mean, how do you prevent? And the answer, I think, is deterrence. If we know that we have a trained, organized, and equipped force to manage a threat like that, then it no longer becomes attractive. The challenge with deterrence is it's difficult to come up with a metric to justify the budget. So if I can show to resource managers, by investing in this capability, I've deterred 25 attacks, I can relate that to 3,000 people. You save 3,000 people by investing in this. Unfortunately, those metrics don't exist. We can't connect the dots like that, right?
Yeah.
Because deterrence goes directly to intent. And generally, if they choose not a CBRN threat, they'll go to a kinetic threat or to just a knife or a plastic bag over somebody's head. They're still going to likely do whatever it is that motivates them. They'll just choose a different weapon.
Yeah. It's a fascinating world. I commend you for doing the work you do. And I'm glad there's people out there like you said, that are thinking about this 24/7, because it's there's a lot to it, a lot to it, and I think the preparation part is kind of lacking from what I've seen. So if we can start getting some people talking about it and change some minds and kind of get in the right direction, I think at least we could have some preparation. Maybe some people work on the prevention, even on the prevention that you were talking about. Actually, made me think of the work that I had just left our gang unit, and one of the big things, the metrics we were trying to figure out a way to come up with was how many murders we've prevented. So outside of an informant telling us, "Hey, when you walked into that place tonight, there was a group outside that was ready to do a hit." Okay, that's nice. So I'm just telling this, as a stat on the side to management to justify, hey, keep us as a team, keep us around, give us money for a budget type stuff. But when the actions don't actually happen, it's like, how do you quantify that? So if the attack isn't carried out, how do you say, you save 3,000 lives or 6,000 lives, or what are you going to put the number at? So it does become kind of hard to actually put a number on it and then express that to the decision makers, where they're going to say, okay, I believe in this mission, and I find usefulness in it, and we're going to continue to give you money, however much that might be. So
Yeah, and deterrence is not forever, right?
mhm,
Deterrence is momentary, and to your point, oftentimes we're a victim of our success. If we do a great job at deterrence, and it appears the threat has gone away, then why resource the deterrence anymore?
100%.
Clearly, the threat's not there. The U.S. had that mindset in the '80s. The politicians normally said, "Where's this Russian threat that you're talking about?" Fast forward to 2025, it's in front of you, right?
Hmm.
We were able to deter for a number of years, and we did something collectively. The European nations, United States, et cetera, to present an opportunity for that threat to come back. Again, it's intent and capability. Quick war story, if you've got time.
Yeah, go ahead.
In 2018, I deployed to Iraq, not as a soldier this time, but as a contractor to do chem, bio, rad, nuke surveys. And generally, what we did was, is the Iraqi army displaced ISIS. They would call us in. We would survey kitchens before the family reunited with their home. And because that's where ISIS used to manufacture IEDs. You have water, you have a sink, you have
Mhm.
all the necessary things, and the kitchen table and that sort of thing. So it's an invisible threat. Our job was to do a survey and, advise, probably helpful if you wash the counters down before you make supper, kind of thing. I went through University of Mosul, which is an overarching term for about, I forget, 16 universities. It's kind of like saying, I'm at the University of Texas. That's got universities all over. So they had an undergrad, they have grad, they had post grad, they had med school, pharmacy school, nursing school, vet school, just 16 universities and about 200 chemistry laboratories that ISIS would go into and harvested what they needed to for their improvised explosive devices. And then when they left, they made a mess of things. They would take the chemistry and break glasses, or they'd throw it outside. And they just created their own man made sort of hazmat. And I'm walking through the medical school with a leader of the school. And come to find out, they had a gamma irradiator that had malfunctioned probably 5 or 6 years ago. That's important because I was there in 2018. ISIS was displaced out of Mosul in about 2017. They were there about 2014 to 17. Gamma radiator, to give you an idea of what it does, it has a cobalt 60 source at its center, which is a gamma emitting isotope. Gamma is that radiation that is extremely harmful, right? It goes through most things except for lead.
Yeah.
And so it can and does kill relatively quickly. This is a vertical device with a cobalt 60 source inside and what we call a nest. And it's useful if you've got like donated human blood that you want to make sure aren't any viruses in there before you give it to a patient, or you have tissue that you want to make sure it's clean of any pathogens. You expose it to radiation like this for a very small amount of time, and it kills whatever's in there. Then I can safely give the blood, right? We do the same thing at the US border to vegetables and fruits and crops that we import.
Oh, really?
We just expose it briefly to gamma radiation, and the parasites and the viruses and the pathogens all die. They're nothing but leftover DNA, and they go to our grocery stores after they're washed. Anyway, so they used it and they're generally used in the laboratory. And what happens is a cobalt 60 source is raised out of its nest, and at the very top, it's kind of got an aperture, kind of like an old time camera, where it would open up, right? And then it would close. They went to shut it down, and it didn't. It got caught. It wouldn't go all the way into the seated position. So the aperture on the top was slightly open. I arrived 5 years later, and they said, "This is our gamma source, gamma radiation." I had a small personal radiation detector the size of an old time pager. And when they opened up the door to it, I thought, this is 30 years worth of professional experience down the drain. I know what this is. I'm gonna be dead. And the paycheck wasn't quite large enough that I should have asked for. Luckily for me, I did a survey of all four sides and the bottom, and then I put that detector on top of it where the aperture was, and it screamed like a rat eating an onion for about 5 minutes, and then it quieted, and then it repeated. It screamed again, and I looked at the gentleman and I said, "This is the ground level. What's on the second and third floor?" He said, "Classrooms for the medical school."
Oh, wow.
Students had been exposed for over 5 years
Yeah.
to extreme levels of gamma radiation. One of the gentlemen on my team was armed security from the UK, strapping, huge, muscle, human being. And he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Jeff, I've never seen that look in your eyes. You're normally, I mean, we've been to the airport, we've taken fire before by ISIS." He said, "I've never seen you like that." He said, "What was it?" And I told him, I said, "I can take that gamma radiator and I can put it horizontal now instead of vertical. I can put it in a box truck because gamma radiation goes through the metal of the door. And I can survey." At the time, they were going through elections. I think they had like 112 candidates. And I said, "If I want to kill somebody, I just watch their house for about 30 days. And the last light in the house that goes out is probably their bedroom
Mm-hmm.
because they work. And then I park that box truck with a gamma radiator pointing at that bedroom. All right. And it's just down the street. Maybe I take the wheels off so it's really difficult for people to move. And then I just leave. I said, inside of 2 weeks, he's going to be dead
Jeez.
or she's going to be dead. And they have armed security. Nobody will know the
Yeah.
difference. It'll be radiation sickness as a cause of death, but people will suspect that somebody poisoned their food or their water or something else. I said, that's why it's a threat. That's why. And it's an extreme threat. In other words, it's lethal. It doesn't just incapacitate. So my point is that can happen. That's what we call a radiation exposure device, as opposed to a dirty bomb, a dispersal device, where I have a gamma emitting isotope and I disperse it into the air so it kind of spreads out. And there you really have a contained area where gamma radiation is presented to the civilian population. But again, if we don't have law enforcement roving with squad cars that have detectors on it to tell us that there's something different in the environment, then we really never know.
Wow. Man, that's a lot to think about. And you know what? It's fascinating stuff. I gotta have you back on because I got a ton of stuff I didn't even get to. And I mean, you were saying before you teach on weapons of mass destruction. That's a whole nother conversation we could have as well. So, um, and I want to say, give you the last word here. How can people find you and your work or connect with you? Where's the best places?
Yeah. So if you want to look me up, I'm Dr. Jeffrey Brodeur, Brodeur on LinkedIn. And there, if you go to my site, you'll have a link to the Rigaku Analytical Devices website, where we've got a range of handheld Raman devices. But I've got one more war story. Actually, example I'd like to give you if you've got 5 minutes. Do we have time?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Let me get back to my earlier point that there are a number of why. So when I instruct at university, the number one question is, why do we have so many chemical warfare agents? Why is it there's just this laundry list? And the answer is because each one of them was designed with a military task and purpose. And let me give you an example, or actually two scenarios, and I'll make them quick. The first is if I'm in the offense and I've been tasked to take an objective, what I normally will do is introduce indirect fire, bombs from aircraft, artillery, mortars, that sort of thing. It does two things very effectively. It cuts your antennas, making your communication devices less than optimal, and then it sort of fixes your position. So you're less inclined to get in your combat vehicle and move, and more inclined to bury yourself in that foxhole and not move, right? You're not.
Yeah.
So it fixes you. And then about 20 minutes before I assault the objective, I introduce a choking agent that most militaries don't have instruments for. Almost all of us have instruments for nerve agent. And then after that goes on for about 3 to 5 minutes, I'll introduce, in addition to that, nerve agent, non-persistent nerve agent. Both the choking and the nerve agent are non-persistent, which means it'll remain in the atmosphere as a vapor or respiratory hazard for a finite amount of time, normally 15 to 20 minutes, right? It'll blow away, it'll evaporate, it'll do that sort of thing. As soon as the nerve agent hits the objective, then most soldiers will take a look at their partner next to them, and you exhibit nerve agent symptoms. So we're all trained to put our protective mask on. When you put your protective mask on, I've already inhaled some amount of choking agent, which will cause me to. Or the other nice thing is blood agent to mix in. It's always a cocktail: blood agent, choking agent, and nerve agent. I put my mask on, and if I've breathed in blood agent, I'll feel like I'm not getting enough oxygen. So what's my response?
Take it off.
Take the mask off and get more nerve agent. If I breathe in choking agent, I'm going to vomit in my mask. Now I've got a life or death decision. Do I drown in my vomit or do I take my mask off? I take my mask off and I have more nerve agent. 20 minutes later, Jeff shows up with my platoon of tanks. You're having a very bad day. You're an easy target to neutralize. I've only incapacitated you. And then in about, a couple of minutes, I've taken the objective and I do to the next objective.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there are so many different non-persistent agents in the inventory. Now let's flip the script. If the defense scenario, if I'm in a defense, I will present obstacles to the enemy, and normally the most difficult, based on where their avenue of approach, and most of the time, the last places to areas to emplace obstacles are on my flanks, because I don't think the enemy's going to come from that direction, and where there is uninviting terrain.
Okay.
So putting a minefield where there's a swamp, culverts, that sort of thing, is time consuming. So as soon as I see that the enemy is coming to my position, now I deploy persistent nerve agents in the lowlands, in the swamps, on my flanks, because I can get it there relatively quick. It doesn't worry about the geography. It'll still persistent agents normally come in the form of kind of grandma sticky oatmeal, right? And they'll hang around for decades sometimes. And so as a maneuver force enters the flank and they detect a persistent nerve agent, they don't want to go through it. They don't want to mask up. So they find the clear route to go around. If I've done my job right, that clear route, in concert with my physical obstacle plan, presents you as an army into what we call a kill zone. So instead of firing ordnance 40 kilometers wide, I've channelized you into 5 kilometers. Now I can more effectively use all of my ordnance.
Yeah, focus the fire.
Exactly. Yeah. And so unless you are trained in the art of employing chemical warfare agents, in other words, if I'm the chemical officer and we find persistent nerve agent, you bet I'm going to convince that maneuver commander to hold their breath and drive right on through it, because I know that's the flank. I'm going to catch the enemy, in the rib cage while
Mhm.
all their weapons are facing a different direction, and then we can take a bath afterwards.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. That's pretty good. You know what? Big discussions. Definitely got to have a bit more chat on this. So I'll have to get you back on down the road. I really appreciate the time today. Fascinating stuff, educational, informative. So no, I'm glad we could connect and get you on here.
Well, it's my pleasure, and I appreciate the invitation. The answer is yes to the next one, whatever it is.
Appreciate the time, and yeah, hang on the line for 2 seconds.
Thank you, sir.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening in and following along with the discussions. Be sure to click the follow or subscribe button on your respective listening platform. Also, check out the Quiet Professional on X and Instagram under TQP780. And most importantly, please share where you can. Everyone has a part to play in getting these education and information pieces out there, so pass it along. Thanks again.